right, Dr. Engelman, thank you so much. Let's dive into this question, which is something that you and I have talked about a little bit before, but I wanted to kind of dive into, well, no, focus down into just this one aspect of the question, which is why it is possible and what are the different thought processes that we need to think about. Why can a food come up on a food reactivity panel that has never been eaten? So for example, a vegan that has got meat protein or animal protein that comes up positive on a food reactivity panel, because the practitioner's first question is invariably, this test must be wrong. The person's never eaten salmon. How could they have salmon antibodies? But it's not that the test is wrong. It's that the immune system is doing something. So how do we work out, why can this happen? What do we do next?
Well, you're talking about antibodies.
Yeah.
Antibodies, they hook onto things and they, are presented things so they decide what to hook onto that are usually most of the time protein fragments, peptides, but there are other antibodies that actually can hook on other things besides that, but usually it's peptides. And that peptide usually that's displayed and, that you're going after is frequently not bigger than about 10 amino acids big. That's all the binding site will bind to. But the truth of the matter is that the actual epitope, which is, so you've got your antigen, which is the peptide, and that may be a piece of a protein that's 10 amino acids. But the active part, the epitope, is usually 2, 3, 4 amino acids in a row. Is a big, a big epitope. It's usually 2 or 3. Okay. So of that whole 10, really the ones that really are doing the binding and giving the signals is about 3. So if a person makes an antibodies, they, I always go, your antibodies don't have a mommy and daddy to tell them what to do. They don't have eyes. They don't have ears. They can't understand language. So what do? They sort of bump around like a blind person trying to figure out, where they're supposed to go, and they smell it and they, give it a little, they push on it a little bit and try and figure out what it is. Well, actually, it sort of reminds me of is this an elephant? Well, it depends on, or a mouse, right? Depends on where you push. You only push a little amount of it. Feels like a mouse to me. So antibodies, not being a religious guy, I don't, I'm not worried about being stricken down, but they're stupid. I mean, I hate to say it, but they're not that smart. So if you have 2 things that have this amino acid next to this and this amino acid next to that, and they're looking at 3 out of the 10, it doesn't have to be all 10 look alike. It only has to be 3 or 4 of them look alike. And that antibody goes, wow, that's what I'm supposed to bind to. But unfortunately, that's a piece of pineapple. It's not a turkey leg, which is what you were originally made for. So what that means is I could actually bind to a turkey leg, a piece of turkey, or a pineapple, or a piece of pineapple. Then you go, well, pineapple doesn't have anything to do with turkey. Well, I don't care. That's not my job. I can't see the whole thing. I see my little area. And so that's why the cross-reactivity, when I started in this business, and I thought, God, the immune system's unbelievable and it's perfect. And every once in a while it gets off course a little bit. Then I started studying a little bit more and I went, wait a minute. That doesn't make sense. And then in the integrative medicine community, they all talk about homology, which is 2 things looking, at least molecularly similar. And, they show a perfect example is gliadin and thyroid peroxidase. So they show a little piece of thyroid peroxidase, 10 amino acids, and a little piece of gliadin. And 3 out of the 10 look similar, and next thing you know, your gliadin antibodies binding to thyroid peroxidase, and you got Hashimoto's. So that's sort of the way I look at these things. And it's biology. There's not that much new under the sun. One, it's carbons and, nitrogens and hydrogens and so forth. So, and one often became an animal and another one often became a pineapple. So they're not that much different. So it wouldn't be that hard to get confused with one to the other. And that's what happens. And so if a person says, okay, I have antibodies to this, and let's say it's a food, and somebody says, well, I don't eat that food. Well, then that you have antibodies that are monoclonal. In other words, I brought it in, I looked at it, I mushed it around, I now made a very specific antibody that really fits that. May not be perfect, but it's damn close. Okay. Would it be great if everything was like that? It'd be fantastic. Then you wouldn't have to ever worry about cross-reactivity or anything else. So that's a monoclonal antibody. That's an antibody that's made to fit that. But it has to see it in order to make a perfect fit. It can't do it by accident. And so if somebody says, I don't eat that food, then door number one, which is leaky gut, just closed for that food, because you can't make a perfect antibody for something you've never seen. I don't care how leaky your gut is.
Okay.
So the only two things that are left are cross-reactivity, the pineapple and the turkey leg,
Yep.
right? One's a fruit, the other one's a meat. There's
Yep.
your answer to their doctor's question. Or polyreactive antibodies that basically will stick to anything you put in front of them. That's about all you got. Now, when it comes to the array 5 from Cyrex, which is the autoimmune panel, then there's another wrinkle thrown in, which is what's called natural antibodies, which don't apply to food and they don't apply to other things. These are things we've, our own tissue that we've seen when we're being formed, that basically allow antibodies that recognize our own stuff and don't get excited about it, but they don't not notice it. They're allowed out. Those are called allergic autoimmune antibodies, and they have a function, which is a cleanup function. So if somebody has antibodies on the autoimmune panel, that that don't fit with what their symptoms are or whatever, that's possibly a natural antibody. And that's a wrinkle that only applies to, our own tissue. Doesn't apply to food. We didn't see food when we were being formed in the bone marrow. So only that applies to that. So that's adds a fourth wrinkle to autoimmune things, is the first three, monoclonal antibody, cross-reactive antibody, polyreactive antibody, and in this case, natural antibody.
Fabulous. So the result isn't wrong. It is going to be one of those other options. And so if the person was to eat the food, let's say they did have a turkey leg and they're reacting to pineapple, they would react to turkey because their immune system, the antibodies in their immune system are primed for that specific cross-reactive sequence.
Correct. Now, that may have consequences. It may not have any consequences. We have plenty of things that we react to that don't cause any consequences. But if you go on the premise that antibodies aren't very smart, and the less of them you have floating around with nothing to do, the better it would be, just in case, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the reality is that the majority of people, I think, who are running Cyrex panels at least have something wrong with them. This is not a test that's being run as a health MOT over here.
Correct.
So it's likely to be relevant. So if you run an array 10 and there are 10 antibodies, but the person is a vegan and 5 of those antibodies are for animal protein, it's not as likely that it's going to be polyreactive. It's much more likely that that's going to be cross-reactivity. So perhaps there's an infection that's cross-reacting, or perhaps the foods are cross-reacting with each other. But if
Right.
you've got your own thing,
Here's the thing about cross-reactivity. You only know what's cross-reactive with what if somebody's done that test.
studied it, if someone's researched it, yeah.
Because otherwise you could have something and go, I don't eat that, or some of these things with these brain proteins for links and stuff like that. I don't know, they're positive, and you look and, and you're just not sure, you go, I have an antibody to that, but what does it mean? Well, it means that either that you have a real antibody to it or it's cross-reactive. And I can only tell you from the literature, and that's what the clinician should do, because Cyrex, a lot of the stuff that's written in Cyrex was written in 2015, 2016, when this book was put together, and a lot of stuff's happened. So I think it's clinician's job, and I do it, is to go, let me see if there's something new that that I didn't know about, or maybe they missed the article. He doesn't look at every single thing that's out there. And I found some things that, that in fact that I find that isn't even in here. So I think it's the clinician's job to go Google with Google. I mean, so easy.
I agree with you. Test results are not biblical, right? They're not the law. It's part of the intersection of your clinical practice and how you're informing your clinical practice, and it's information that you then build on and overlay, right? So you can use that to continue on your investigation. You've got this information now from the test result. What else do we need to know? Let's take it to PubMed. Let's take it to Google. And that, as a clinician, that's the clinician's responsibility. This is your patients.
I think it is.
Yeah, I agree.
Critical thinking.
Yeah, it's important to know how to think about the person in front of you. Don't take
Correct.
the lab result as the only thing that will tell you what to do next.
Correct.
Well, it's a shock that you and I are on the same page about something.
Oh, you had that, isn't it?